Going once, going twice on air. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Sunday morning, Eastern Standard Time, New York City time, 11 a.m. This is New York City Large Scale Scrum Meetup, one of the largest and fastest growing globally. Today we have a very special treat, very special guest with us. Cornel, Candice Frost, she kindly agreed to come and speak to our community. So a few words about uh, Cornel Frost. She's an active duty officer in the United States military. She currently serves as a director on the Army intelligence staff at the Pentagon. She's also a West Point graduate and a paratrooper, and an Afghanistan combat veteran, as well as an instructor to leadership. As a part of her own consulting business, Cornel Frost focuses on increasing opportunities for other businesses to use mentorship to build a bigger bench with their employees. She uses public speaking and digital media to engage with groups and businesses working to inspire employees through transformational leadership. So without any further ado, I would like to pass the baton over to our special speaker, Cornel Frost, and I will try to monitor the chat room, folks. If you have any questions, either hold on till the very end or ping them in the chat, and I'll try to sanitize them and present. So please, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much, Gene, and I appreciate it. I want to kick off with my disclaimer. The views expressed are my own and do not reflect the official policy or position of the United States Army, Department of Defense, or the US government. All right, so legal mumbo jumbo to the side. Welcome and good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're at and whatever time you watch this. I apologize in advance to our people who have attempted to link in with me. Because of my job, I can only connect with US citizens, but I can speak to people around the world. So that's what I'm going to do here with you today. And I appreciate the fact that so many of you have reached out to try to connect with me. And so let's really dive into it. I'm a rapid and iterative speaker. I use my hands a lot, but I do want to tell you I'm from Washington, D.C., and I do work in the Pentagon. I thought I'd throw up a little flair from the next year when we get into cherry blossom season and we'll be vaccinated and ready to go. But what we're talking about and what we're living right now is really the middle of a tumultuous period. We can really look around and see who is really leading, because leadership in crisis comes quickly. Clarity comes to most of us when we're amidst significant chaos. And for those of you in leadership positions, I'd offer the following: that you recognize first where you're at, think about where you want to go, and then find a way to get there. It's really a very simple formula, right? But amidst the current environment of change and what we're living right now, each leader must understand the problems you faced yesterday no longer exist. And it's time to reframe as a leader. And how you do that as a transformational leader really, really matters. So let's kick it off. What is leadership? And this part of the speech, I'm going to kind of run you through some of the things that I've experienced, what I've lived through my vantage point, and why I'm a fan of Scrum, because I've seen some of that transformational leadership that you guys have kind of in your process and what you've done. So to me, leadership really is encouraging a group to get things done, preserving harmony with that in that group to make everyone feel included, but you're motivating them through trust of those that you lead. So you organize the activities and you ensure the work is followed through. At the beginning of a crisis, a leader must first think what has to be done. You have to clarify the urgent versus the important, right? You divide those up and you quickly ask, how do I get feedback to know which is which? You do this when you surround yourself with people you can trust and candidly tell you what's going on. Because decision making in a vacuum really leads to disastrous consequences. Understanding who you can power down to and delegate all that you can, because as a leader, you're making decisions. You've got to be clarity of mind, and you can't always be in dotting I's, crossing T's in the weeds, because in crisis, you really have to have clarity. Another part is to remain calm, but zealous in your approach to enthusiastically face this crisis. Bold actions are required by leaders, and those who shrink away from a threat, it's really obvious in their absence. Whether good or bad, share information. People must understand the vision of where you are going. And doing this through a statement, and I've talked about in the past problem statements, but these statements explore and analyze the positive, the neutral, and the negative implications of the tension amidst this crisis. You can really test this by the relevance of understanding through the problem, using it to tell a story. Obviously, narration changes as an organization adapts, right? What was true, and we all know this through living through COVID several months ago, isn't true today. And that narration will change in the future as well. So you have to understand that your story requires adaptations, and it will not correctly solve the frame problem if you don't frame the problem correctly. Isn't that a tongue twister? But it's really it's possible to understand the right problem, but impossible to create a capacity to solve it. So an example of kind of this quandary that I've faced, especially in my line of work, is really during a network intrusion. When an organization faces a crisis after multiple cyber intrusions, leaders and followers know a problem exists, but the organization may not know the complexity or the immediate capacity to solve it. It doesn't exist within the construct of the organization, the department, or the business. And you also need input from law enforcement or cyber agencies required as a leader to lead and move your organization and understand the crisis that it is. Again, these aren't really easy answers to what we're talking about, but I'm postulating ideas and things for you to think through as you're leading through crisis. Another big part of crisis is leave no one behind. People are hungry for good leaders, and your work in crisis will drive them to grow. Of course, I've talked about being zealous, but also I have to reiterate, you have to stay calm. And remember that you're in a crisis and people want guidance, security, and order from their leaders. A big point I can make is playing the violin on the deck of the playing the violin on the deck of the Titanic while it's sinking does no one any good, right? During a crisis, there's no time for catastrophizing. But understand normal has changed, right? And you hear that right now. The world has changed. And some people say, I want to get back to normal. But normal itself is no longer what it used to be. So it takes courage as a leader to recognize the mistakes and promptly adjust and demonstrate why they are where they are. A big point as well, and I like to talk about this. If administratively, bureaucratically, and by the book, right thing to do conflicts with the ethically right thing to do, choose ethics every time. Why? Because morality wins. And I understand in business, sometimes it's really difficult to play to that, to understand that, to always abide by it. But I'll tell you, in the end, morality wins. Now, moving on as well to employment of new solutions, right? This happens when you're in a crisis, when you have weak data or a lack of available information. And what it leads to is poor or misinformed decisions. Sometimes we see leaders who wallow in those decisions, and it does no one any good. You really have to stand up and move forward. There is a time for reflection, kind of looking in that rearview mirror when you drive. That exists. And as a leader, you have to do that because it's a part of self-improvement for later. But nobody drives a car by looking in the rearview mirror the whole way. You have to look forward. And by doing this, you allow discourse to host an open discussion and question the way things are done, right? Some of us don't necessarily always question our ground positioning system or precision navigation and timing, whether that's through Waze or different Google Maps. But sometimes you have to question the way things are done. Is there a better route that I can get to the same answer? And you can do this by finding a suitable solution to the problem you face, by redrawing the mental boundaries surrounding the problem. And there are ways to find success and encourage growth from failures. So let's go back to history, right? History teaches us that innovation, nimbleness, and creativity matter amongst crisis and change. A failure to see a problem for what it really is creates a lagged response. And when a crisis occurs, those who can see it for what it is will develop the ability to scale. And you guys are obviously really good at that. And you talk about it a lot. And a leader who rapidly opens their aperture and looks downstream and sees the effects of a decision for the future. When the fundamental nature of surprise occurs, a person who understands this new system can excel in different environments. And I'll go back to kind of my line of work and the things that I've seen. During much of the Cold War, only a handful of aid organizations would descend upon a conflict zone during a crisis. And this limited the scope of who provided aid and allowed for, a united front against different types of abuse. But then aid organizations began to compete with one another. And for an example, if the World Bank declined funding a project amidst a crisis because of corruption or something else, an Islamic financier may quickly step in and say yes. And if Europe didn't respond quick enough, well, now we see that China offers its services. These are things that I see right now in national security. So leaders who open their aperture tend to see downrange and the effect and recognize the potential exploitation amidst, in my line of work, the fog of crisis. The crisis also tests decision makers' abilities. Its speed is of the essence. Obviously, in the way I talk, speed is of the essence as well, because I want to give you so much of this great stuff to take forward. Speed is of the essence in crisis, and hence why the predicament encountered needs bold leadership. The rapidity of information is honestly like an avalanche when it comes in. And finding the ability to answer and communicate clearly, it takes effort. And this must be done to ensure everyone understands what direction you're rowing in. One must respond or get left behind, because people get on digital and social media and they latch onto your crisis. In today's fast-moving electronic world, your reputation could be enhanced or denigrated in a moment, says Dr. Ed Powers, lead for Northeastern's Master of Science in Corporate Organization Communications program. I love that. Let's really think about it. It's moving so fast. Your reputation could be enhanced or denigrated in a moment. And that's why communication is so important. Leverage your supporters to help speed your ability to get the message out and get the word out, because people only care how much you know if they know how much you care. So make communication personal and impactful to those who you're leading. Now, also, amidst the stress of a now crisis, a great leader has to think strategically and understand the lasting impacts of the crisis instead of the current everyday confrontations. A leader must take time to ask, what is the problem? Where are we at? And what does it look like in the end? Just as I started at the beginning here. And then, how do we get there? So accepting the crisis and framing the new problem is important. They must take nonlinear, creative, divergent approaches to leading forward. And this reinterpretation of thinking when confronted with a novel problem, like the novel coronavirus, it doesn't fit previous patterns. An example, again, in my line of work, of this reframing for us occurred after September 11th, 2001, when the United States was the target of a major terrorist attack. We had to reframe in a new dynamic way that required many organizations to drastically shift their focus on an issue previously not considered critical by most agencies in the government. So leaders must reframe when current concepts cannot decipher into new developments or phenomenons. When you get what you've been taught as the status quo no longer fits, and it's impossible to implement a new way, you have to gather as a group. And this is where experimentation is key. This is really best described by Massachusetts Institute of Technology professor Donald Shun's design concept of reflection and action. And I love this idea that Dr. Shun talks about. He questions what is known, and it allows leaders to think about what started this crisis. During this time, leaders can restructure strategy of action, understanding a phenomena or ways to frame the problem, allowing for our staff to think about different approaches to the issue. You've got to account for the ambiguity, the vague goals, and the situation that keeps changing. Now, the Army has advice for this situation in the statement that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. A leader must adapt plans as the situation unfolds. So problem reframing allows that shift from trying to address the initial question to asking whether the right problem is even being addressed. This causes participants to reflect on events and occurrences. And this is a part of moving vertically to get to a solution, and laterally with the understanding that change occurred. And in an interpretation of the events, the shift, the entire group will get to a new solution during the crisis. It absolutely will transform an existing idea into a different one, albeit carrying it through some of the original characteristics. We talk about the characteristics of war changes, but the nature of war stays constant. So the nature of your business may stay the same, but the characteristics and the things that you do may change. Prevent yourself from focusing on small scale details, as it prevents you from missing the larger picture. You see, if one searches for only the efficient and effective solution in the midst of crisis, there is a potential for spiraling into chaos, because reaction to change must be adaptive and active. All the while, a leader must clearly communicate the message and as accurately as possible. When in charge, be in charge, and attempt to make the work fun too. In those still small moments, find the ability to demonstrate your humanity. The adept saying, never let them see you sweat, it remains true, but you also have to allow yourself the ability to laugh, scream, and cry at the situation in your own way, sheltered from the judgment of others, of course. Now, continue to frame the crisis through the constant analysis of the crisis itself. Good leaders in crisis work to identify the difference between the short and the long game. Therefore, if it's a natural disaster that impacts an area, that you work to understand the timeline down to minutes, hours, and weeks. In a crisis without precedence, though, you have to gather initial information, but you're not beholden to it, because again, you remain flexible in how new information comes along. Placing new processes into effect and analyzing multiple events on a continuous basis to anticipate potential outcomes of a crisis, it's really, in my line of work, again, akin to writing a branch plan or a sequel to an event that's occurring. Maybe it'll occur, or we have to look next. If the original plan requires revisions, do it. The ease of letting the incident distract a leader during a crisis occurs far too often. Remain focused, not too distracted, and it's a key to leading in crisis. Now, crisis eventually ends. We will take a deep breath, the world will eventually, and it'll lead us to recovery. But sometimes that recovery may even be harder than during the crisis itself. For instance, as things slow down and the recognition of this strange new world adapts, it remains critical to refocus and remain relevant for a changed future. It's what you guys are good at. Adaptive work requires adjustments, learning, compromise on the part of many among the dominant, complacent, and beleaguered. Follow distressed leaders may be content with the way they're leading because they just walk away with a mixed mindset. But really, good leaders understand change occurred while looking at, hey, a leader that took bold action, they want to minimize the loss to themselves and look for leaders that have protection. Those followers do. So recovery after a crisis may result in genuine change. It may result in leadership change. And it also requires that the people who are very frustrated and an expectation of what could be delivered the way things were, you've got to reset. Additionally, real hardship may result after the effect of a crisis. Boldness and protection do not always go hand in hand. Letting go of new ideas and the way things were previously done, it may result during that recovery after the crisis. Always in any good military discussion, we talk about the military strategist Karl von Clausewitz. And he opines that critical inquiry requires questioning the result of an action, whether it conformed to the intent of its aim. After the smoke clears and leaders reset their organization, a recognition that change occurs may cause pain. Reset occurs amidst joy, anxiety, and grief following a crisis. And the opportunities to lead post-crisis requires a leader to know how hard to push those who've weathered the storm. I think we definitely saw that in New York City. Jean's from there right now, and what it did to those in the healthcare profession. They weathered a massive storm, unprecedented in our lifetime. So we had to understand the tolerance for transition really required a steadfast leader to see their organization and get back to stability of the environment. They didn't get back to the past, but they just got back to how can we get to stability. To reset after a crisis takes a leader's wisdom to shed what is no longer necessary, even though previously it was thought critical, because a crisis determined what's really, really necessary. And this goes, again, we talked about morality and character. Courageous leadership in a time of crisis starts with the irrational acknowledgement to commit to take care of those you lead. When the world as you understood is stable and consistent is hit by a crisis, those of you who are out there and are good leaders, you have grabbed the reins and you are boldly moving forward. Focus where you are and where you want to go, because in an environment of change, you understand how the context changes, and your flexibility to move forward with bold actions will achieve success. Your ability to reframe the situation as a leader allows for fundamental change during a time of crisis. Now, I thank you so much. I hope that energized a couple of you, because these are really strong remarks that I believe in, that leadership is super important during crisis. But I wanted to leave enough time to have so many of you ask me questions, because that's where, I can prepare remarks all day long, but what's on your mind? And what are the things when I talk about leading in crisis that you've thought about that you'd like to dig into a little bit more? So Jean, you can go ahead and kick it off with questions, please.
Yeah, I was just pinging, apologies, I'm pinging privately someone. Folks, we appreciate your comments in the chat, but if you wanted to be turned into a question to the panelist speaker, well, now we are actually on air, so just raise your hand and ask the question, and Colonel Frost will reply. So the floor is yours. Just shoot at will. Anyone? Otherwise, I'll just take it.
I see. I'm gonna.
Yeah, go ahead.
Colonel Frost, hi. This is Jim Scheel from Las Vegas. Number one, thank you for taking the time. That was a great talk. I appreciated it. And Jean, thank you for posting the link to the recording, because I'm going to have to replay this at least 4 or 5 times. I was writing faster than I could actually catch what I was doing. Anyway, my question to you, Colonel, post-COVID, you mentioned recovery. And the thing that's been crossing my mind the last couple of months is when the recovery begins, and as you said, the world takes a breath, and for the first time, we start to really account for the number of lives lost and destroyed. What do you see happening, and how should leadership be responding around the world?
Jim, I'm noticing something that Colonel Frost suddenly disappeared from the chat.
Oops.
So let's stay put. Let's make.
I scared her away.
No. I think it was just
tough question.
Yeah, I guess. All right. We'll tell you what. I will.
Let's stand by. I'm sure she's trying to.
Yeah, I'm sure she will. I'm going to recopy my question and post it to her when she comes back, so she can just read it.
Yep. I'm not sure if there was a way to pause the recording, but I'll.
Yeah, you can pause it.
Hey, sorry about that.
Oh, here we go.
Okay, so we're at take 2. All right, now you get the real background. My computer just dropped, and I sincerely apologize. So I'm on my phone now. I'm sorry if the sound just went from good to awful. So let's kick it off.
There was a question
that I'm adapting.
Yep, Jim, could you play a question?
I'll tell you what, I'm gonna, Colonel, I've sent it to you on chat so that you'll probably be able to read it faster than I can say it.
She's on the phone, so it might be difficult for her to read.
Okay.
Ping me and I can, or if you want to just make it vocal.
Oh, I'll be happy to restate it.
Just restate it if you could.
Okay. So Colonel, again, thank you. So my question was this: post-COVID, when the recovery begins, and as you said, the world finally takes a breath and starts to account for the number of lives that were lost over the past year, what do you see happening as far as how people react, and what would you recommend for leadership in terms of responding to that?
I think a big one, we're going to start to relook our priorities. And I think in my course, I go to my line of work, but to any business, individuals, I think we are going to see a large scale shift in the way things were done with respect to, like, this is a great example, right? Pre-COVID, we would go in and I would have to fly to New York and I would stand at a podium and I would be able to give this, big speech, and it'd be great, and we'd have cocktails. I can have 100 people attend and I can teach so many more people. We're not going to go, we will still have big conventions and we will have go-to work because it is important. Face-to-face really is important. But what's more important is we've realized we can educate people in so many different ways, and we can share knowledge, and we can work together in a multitude of different manners and means. That will be huge. Now, that's the good side. I really think sharing information will grow. I think we'll take the environment a little more seriously. I think we'll definitely take health security more seriously when we look in my line of work with national security. But there's a downside too. And what we've definitely seen through this pandemic is really the bifurcation of things. And I am of concern in this crisis, especially now we're going to see a crisis in, one quick thing is our education system. We are seeing the haves and have-nots continually grow further and further apart. I think we're seeing right now, and this is just American-centric to our friends out there, we have seen an election year that is just continuing to go from one spectrum to the other, where we talk about things we disagree with versus things that we, bring us together. And so those are things that we're really going to have to face, and it's going to be a challenge for us. We need leaders that are transformational and not transactional. A transactional leader is someone that, hey, I have 15 employees, they all stand at the counter, they work this time, they punch their card, it's a give and take. Transformational leaders, people that inspire others. And I'm really hoping that not only where I'm at right now in America deals with that, but also the world. We start to seek the ability into kind of that thirst for more transformational leadership. Thanks for your question. That was great.
Thank you, ma'am.
It was great. By the way, if you would like to put your camera off just when you speak so that you get some bandwidth back from your phone.
Okay.
That would be great. It's just up to you. Right now, you're kind of stable. Before you were a little choppy.
Okay.
Let me bring back to you. There was at least two more questions. There are two more questions. One is, so I'm going to go in reverse. What does clear communication and transparency mean in your industry, given the sensitivity of information? And does it have the same definition across your entire organization, or is it compartmentalized? I guess that's the question. Does it depend?
Right. So I work in an extremely classified environment, and true transparency, we call it a need to know. But I've got to make sure that those people who have the need know the issue that's at hand. And so that's where I make almost, I wouldn't say, it's a little stark, but life and death decisions to make sure those leaders who have to make a decision have the right amount of information, the greatest understanding of what the problem is at hand. And it's put in, I like to call it bite-sized pieces. Sometimes it's really hard when you're so dug into an issue, right? And you've done tons of research and you're just sunk cost into, this is my thing. And you have 15-page paper and I'm like, I need 2 paragraphs. That's hard for people sometimes. And I've got to be very transparent with leaders. Hey, we have a lot of information in depth. We have solid knowledge, or this is very shaky intelligence that we're on. I'm constantly making sure through clarity that I let people know that I speak with and help make decisions where they're at on that scale. Also, I can't be transparent with everyone all the time. That's why I kind of work in intelligence. Some things just have to be secrets, and that's okay, just as long as those decision makers know, and that I'm abiding by laws and regulations that we hold as sacrosanct in our world. Thanks. Great question.
Thank you. I'm going to paraphrase another one. So quote unquote, I've heard during the current situation several times via different means, like talk, chat, a person is afraid of virus as long as he or she has money in the bank, account and have grocery at home. What message does this convey? I'm not sure. Does that make sense to you? Do you?
Yeah, say that first part again. The person is
So
what?
the part during the current situation several times via different means like talk or chat. A person is afraid of virus
Yeah.
as long as he or she has money in the back and a grocery at home, I guess.
Yeah. So I think I understand the question is, the luxury of kind of dealing with the crisis in a different way. You can focus more on that crisis because the immediate fact of, I don't have to worry about a roof over my head or food in my belly. And that is truly, I think those of us see crisis in a different manner. Absolutely. You see the world from where you sit at the table. So if you're sitting at the table, for instance, in my line of work, when I sit at the table and I am downrange in Afghanistan, that's a very different viewpoint. I'm looking at the world through the lens of potentially, life or death situations versus I'm dealing with the Pentagon budget. That's a very different view that I have at the table. And I've had to deal with both and what's urgent and what's important. If you're dealing with, potential life problems of lack of shelter, lack of food, those are absolutely urgent situations that you've got to deal with. And I think that's tough for everyone. I do appreciate the question because it really is true. And that's something that I really spend a lot of brain power thinking about. It's because post-COVID, everyone expects the economy to recover, boom back. Things are going to absolutely change. Look at the 2008 housing crisis that we had in America. There were some great things that came out of that. I mean, we really transformed the way we online, way things were done online. Even some companies started during that time. Uber was one of them. But what that changed was the fact that taxis and many different, people started working and then they weren't paid employees in a different way. So what will come out of this crisis? Many different things. Obviously, we're seeing it right now with, Amazon and different businesses and how they use those platforms. What will also come out of that, I think, is going to be transformative in many different ways. Great question, though. I hope I maneuvered around it.
Yeah, thank you. You did, and I'm afraid to jinx it, but I think you're stable. Your connection is stable now, so
Fantastic.
For that. Another one I see. How have you been effective influencing your leaders to apply the concepts you spoke about today when they are slipping to chaos management?
Yes. So I love the saying, lead from where you're at, and anyone can lead. You can lead down. Obviously, that's a little bit easier when you're at the top of the totem pole, you're at the top of the pyramid. It's a little bit easier to lead. You can lead laterally with your peers, and then you can lead from the grassroots levels up. Now, when all the world about you is starting to freak out, and I think we definitely experienced that quite a bit from my vantage point in late December, early January, we started to kind of like the whirligig, right? Things were just in this spiral of chaos. You had to go with what you knew. And so I was very fortunate to be able to deal with a lot of the scientists that are now working at Operation Warp Speed in the vaccine that's forthcoming. There are just so many unknowns, but I took a more nuanced approach of saying, okay, laterally, how can we present this information with what we know the best of our knowledge, that number one, it doesn't, make people start running in circles and freaking out. But number two, making people say, hey, it's like the flu. So we had to present information to the best of our ability and to start pointing at different people that reacted in different ways in the manner in which they did. I think we did a decent job, and we really kind of restructured the way leaders thought in the Pentagon about how we would have to plan for an adaptive future. And we said 12 to 18 months that this could potentially impact people. I was not a popular person when I put that out. But I've always said I'd rather be as informative as fast as I can with the data that I have and the knowledge that through experience that I've gained. You've got to be able to do that. And sometimes you've got to, that statement, speaking truth to power, when you step up to bat, sometimes you got to step up to bat and you might You might strike out, and that's okay. But also you may hit a home run, and the other team may not be very happy with that. So just honestly sharing information to the best of your ability.
Thank you. Someone pinged me privately. This is an interesting one. In the corporate world, we have a delineation between leadership and management. The latter being reserved for true leaders, people that actually are able to influence others, by example and inspire. With the former being mostly high-paid, ranking executives. So this is the delineation that is pretty important to understand in the corporate world, and people see it. What kind of delineation do you see in the same dimension in your own world, in the world of military? Is there a delineation between a just highly ranked officer versus a true leader?
And so what I would say with that is there's a big difference between a leader and a manager. And don't always go with the title, right? Those of you who have got a couple years of being out in the world under your belt, you definitely know, the title doesn't necessarily mean who the influencer is, who the person that's making things happen. Now we have what's called leaders by position, and they may be the commander. And then we have what's called a staff. And that person is the one that really, if you think about logistics, if you think about purchasing, budgeting, a comptroller, supply chain management, information, business development. Now, those don't necessarily correlate like this with the military, but we do have kind of a bifurcation of, okay, who is the person that's developing the vision and the mission and what our priorities are? That is the appointed leader, the person put in position. But what I'd like to talk about as well is being that transformational leader, being that person. You don't necessarily always have the title, but you have the ability to influence the change. And that's what's so important, because you can lead from any position. I had a great mentor that told me once, she said, someone said, hey, you have to sit at the head of the table. You have the most rank. You're the highest ranking person in the room. And she sat in the middle of the table and said, I can lead from any position. I can lead from anywhere where I'm at. And I thought, wow, that's impactful. So the way you think about yourself, I always say making sure the courage and competence scales are equaled out. Don't have too much of one. You've got to have both at an equilibrium, and that will create leadership. Managers are important as well, but my impetus with talking about transformational leadership is I really want to kind of mentor people to think in their mind's eye, hey, I am a leader. I am making change. I'm influencing people, because you make more transformative efforts occur through that way of thinking.
That was great. Thank you. One more question I got in the private here. True or false? It's kind of a true or false. So it seems in the corporate world, stakes are lower than in your world. So risks that some leaders potentially are willing to take are higher, because enemy stakes, that there's a high degree of apology that we could expect. I'm kind of paraphrasing.
Yeah.
Because in your world, lives are at stake. In the corporate world, lives are really not at stake. So what do you
shareholders may not agree. So I'm joking. I'm making a shareholder joke. They may think their dollars are their lives. So you are correct. And risk tolerance is something we do the same thing. If the mission is the most important things, mission and people are balanced out, and it's very important for both. But we also, in my line of work, we have to understand risk and the tolerance for risk that's moving forward. Although, yes, lives are at stake and it's really important, mistakes still occur in the military just as they do in business. And so by understanding what's the most important thing to accomplish, what is the mission, what do we have to get done? What drives that mission is strategy. And I have to talk to the saying, culture eats strategy for lunch, right? Or breakfast, or I'm saying it wrong. But the culture is really important. I want to kind of drive to that. Risk is acceptable and understandable by the culture that you've created. And that culture allows for trying things different. And that's something that's, I kind of spoke to in the remarks earlier, but you have to have a culture of adaptability, innovation, and change. And if you create that, I always say, look at the people that you want to work for. Why do you want to work for them? And how can you create that similar culture? Because the job titles, at the end of the day, they're great. And money is important too. But what's most important is how can you impact change? How can you find purpose and meaning and value? That means a lot. And that also allows for, hey, is someone you're working with or working for, are they acceptable to risk? Do they allow you to try different things? To be adaptive? It's really important. And you've got to kind of seek out those opportunities and especially work for people with that mindset. It's a win all around.
Thank you. I have a great one in the public chat. Thank you, Keegan. Would it be possible for the Army to take over critical infrastructure during the pandemic? There was a risk of scaring people, but the civilian world has done a terrible job dealing with the pandemic. Does the military have established doctrine for taking over things like resource distribution or even guarding and distributing the various COVID treatments? If so, what would that be like? That's kind of a compound question, but
yeah, it is kind of a compact question, and I don't want to get too far out of my lane. There are different, it would have to be the political leaders. Again, we are subordinate to our politicians. My commander in chief is the president of the United States. And so by law, they are the ones that really set, hey, what are the priorities? What the Army can and can't do, kind of our left and right limits. So that is more of a policy question that I don't have the belt or the chutzpah to be able to answer very clearly, but I can say what we have done, what the military has done through General Perna and Operation Warp Speed. They've taken this step forward and they've taken someone, he's a career logistician. This guy is like the master of supply chain. And so he has gotten obviously support through a lot of pharmaceutical companies. It's a huge public-private, like coordination like you've never seen. And I can say seeing this, it's been monumental. Sharing as well with the world has been great. But how they'll begin to maneuver forward through this, it is going to be very, very rapid. I think everybody wants things to happen by a snap. And obviously the Army's logistic nodes that are already set forth, they're going to use those. But it's going to be something that will take time and effort. And obviously with each vaccine, the requirements that they have, whether it's the cold deep freeze or the 2 shots, that will be very, very important. So I can't say there are plans underway with that. And it's the Army's assisting our health and human services. And obviously many different foundations around the world are really focused on this one problem.
Understood. Thank you. One more question actually dovetails off of the previous one, the Warp Speed, Operation Warp Speed. Besides Operation Warp Speed, what are some of other interesting ways the Defense Production Act has been leveraged during COVID? Have any innovation stories come out of that work as a silver lining?
I think a silver lining, now I can talk to my line of work. One of the silver linings is we've started to see the ability to stop people from exploiting some of our pharmaceutical company. I do counterintelligence as well. And so, we have definitely seen, and it's emblematic in the open press, that China has stolen quite a bit of information from the United States, and we've seen that occur as well during this time period. It's frustrating, but we're starting to understand the efforts to which they've gone and then how to prevent that. So we're getting better at counterintelligence. I can give a thumbs up for that we're paying a lot more attention to it. And the Defense Production Act is something that obviously our politicians are the ones that enact that and get that moving forward. But I can't say the rapidity to which The military has just started moving, has been, yeah, that part, we obviously we were very focused overseas. And once you had to start to focus on the homeland, it changed a lot of mindsets, and it was pretty awesome to see how quickly and how rapidly our National Guard and Reserve forces kind of, pulled up their bootstraps, started moving forward, and really helped to take care of our citizens at home.
Thank you for that one. Next one, I think these are flowing. What would you say is the most important leadership principle for use in the civilian world?
Oh, wow. To narrow it down to one thing, trust. Trust. And I use trust quite a bit when I'm speaking, because, and why it's so important. Trust is so critical because when people, military, civilian, regardless, trust is of the most importance, because so many things kind of hang on that, right? You're not going to trust everyone, and that's okay. But once you've kind of formed that bond, formed a small team, gone together, work together, forming, storming, and norming. We talk about that when we talk about teams coming together. It's really important to sustain that, to talk about it, and then to be, you got to be honest sometimes. Trust is hard. And that means you have to bring forward, just as I spoke a little bit earlier, the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you trust someone, they're going to be telling you those things all the time. And it will bring your team together stronger. And you can also influence people kind of further down the line. And that's a big part of, I love to talk about mentorship and how you can kind of spread that trust throughout the career that you have to help other people.
Thank you. Another one just came in privately. So you may or may not be familiar with the book, The Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal. So he stresses a lot, balancing between centralized and decentralized leadership.
Yep.
And in our line of business, as a matter of fact, this is just a fine print. We stress a lot balancing between centralized and decentralized coaching. What are your thoughts in general about centralizing versus decentralizing and balancing between the two?
I'm a huge McChrystal fan, and I really agree with that. You've got to have a little bit of both, like anything in life, right? If you have a structure that is completely centralized and bureaucratic, people that work in organizations and thrive in that, oh, God bless them, But then you can't have the other side too, where you're just like out on your own and you're always like, our organization is totally flat and anyone can do anything at any time. It's like, that is the definition of chaos. And the other side is the definition to me of insanity. Like, I continually tell people there's an exception to every policy. So you can't live by both. You've got to realize there is a time and there's a time and place for each one, right? When you've got, in my line of work, we have orders, and they're very, they're very strictly written. Hey, you're going to follow this person. We've got a map. This is their position. This is the other person's position. This is, kind of lining between each sector. Well, if I had a flat organization and then whoever went anywhere, we would have fratricide. So that's why sometimes that structure is important. And the other side, I need people, okay, I've got the map. I understand where the positions are, but then it's the commander's intent. What the commander is saying, hey, go forward, maneuver to this position. Well, the discipline initiative of the individual leader has got to be able to lead people forward and to exploit, hey, I have an advantage here, right? In business development is done by taking the initiative. But if everybody took the initiative all the time, it would be chaos. So really knowing the time and place when to surge on one area or another is key, and it is truly a balance. That's a great point, bringing up McChrystal's Team of Teams book. That is a phenomenal one. I am also a really big fan of Adam Grant's book, Give and Take. Why? Because I think, there's both. There are times in life when you give a lot to an organization or a business, and then there's sometimes when you take a lot. And the best person is the one that can balance in between. Thanks.
Thank you for this one. That's a powerful one. Selfishly, I must say. So there's another one came just a second ago. Who takes the responsibility if the vision is failing in your world? If the leader doesn't take it, then how to influence the leader? So, yeah.
So great question. And, I wish I could say unicorns and butterflies. Every vision statement is impactful and people listen and they go by it. And no, that's just not the real world. There are some people that they aren't leading through or by their vision or mission statement, or they say one thing and they do another. That's really where you as an individual have to kind of look at the organization, say, all right, where do I fit? And I always say the bubble, right? I lead right now and I have a bubble that I have an amazing 63 people that I get to maneuver around in my directorate in the Army intelligence section. In my bubble, I can influence it in many different ways, right? Linearly, I can motivate, I can coach, I can mentor, I can teach. But outside of my bubble, I live by the hierarchical mission statements that come down from the Army's mission statement, my boss's vision statement, then my own, how I interpret that. But let's say, and not at all my boss right now, but let's say, one of my bosses, they just weren't living their value. You've got to figure out how to maneuver within the space that you're allotted to make the best of your ability. And then the other thing is, I always say, find those still small moments. If your leader is open to discussion and discourse, hopefully they are, or your manager, find the right time, the right place, and then calmly but deliberately talk about, I'm seeing some conflicting areas. And here's some points I'd like to make to you. And this is why it's conflicting. This is what I see. If you don't bring it up and you just kind of, verbally vomit over all the people you work with and talk down, I don't have a lot of respect for that. I think by being bold and doing it in a way that obviously you don't want to get fired, but by just bringing those things forward, it's important. That's a growth opportunity for you as well, to talk about, hey, how can I make an impact, make change happen, but also let my leader, I see some discrepancies. It's important to bring it up.
Great. Thank you for this one. Just one question that I thought, so we have, we were T-minus 5 minutes, so let's just see one more we can grab, maybe two. What would you say is the most important leadership principle? Oh, I'm sorry, we took that one. Is there such a thing as a best practice without knowing the unique context?
Best practice with, let me try that one again. A best practice for
without knowing what the unique context is. Is it possible to identify some best practices without really, having a good grasp of a unique context? So
making a decision without all the information.
Oh yes, I do that every day. Okay, now I get it. Thanks for clarifying. So best practices, always know the information that you have and try and interpret, hey, is this great? Like, this is, in my world, I deal with intelligence. So I'm like, this is top shelf intelligence. I can absolutely put a pin in it. This is closest to truth that I can get, right? Am I breaking up or am I still on?
Yeah, you're pretty good.
I'm good. Okay, so I can have the best. And then I have the stuff, it's like the pond. Like it's just, I call it like dirty. You have no idea how clean this is. You would not want to take this intelligence to Vegas or information and bet on it at all. But that's all you have. And then you have in the middle. So when you're helping a decision maker make a decision, you really have to be transparent. And I have to say, like, hey, I oftentimes I use Vegas as a comparison. I use a ton of sports analogies because that's what my audience primarily understands. Go to that decision maker, that person that's making a decision, speak their language and saying, Vegas would say this, we're at these odds with this information. Or, it's kind of like the Chiefs playing the Broncos. You kind of know who's going to win, but it might be a great game to watch if you're an impassioned or, a Broncos player or a fan. I'm joking with sports there, but I'll bring it to the context in which that person, where they grew up, what they know about, what they're passionate about, and helping them frame the problem in a way that they understand this information is not set. But if you don't make a decision, or if you delay a decision, here could be the impacts as well. You have to look beyond, hey, if you make this decision now, or you fail to make a decision, again, you're kind of helping them think forward through that. And use everybody around you. That's another thing. Man, I'm definitely not a party of one. I am a huge part of a team, a big, big team that can help, and ask other people the downstream effects. I think that's a great question. Those are kind of my best practices.
Thank you. Thank you. We had T-2, and before we start, before we wrap and people start leaving, I really wanted to, first of all, I want to personally thank you for coming out here, Colonel Frost, and doing this for us. This is a great opportunity. What would you like to say, as we depart, as we part here? What message would you like to send to everyone, and how much visibility would you like to give to other things that you do? Perhaps maybe you want to leave some information or something that people can later use and maybe get a hold of you. I know you have some limitations, but whatever you feel is right. Yeah.
Sure. Number one, thanks for attending this. This is, as you can kind of tell, this is a huge passion project of mine. I am really, really excited about training and teaching other people. You can grab access regardless of where you're at in the world on my website, www.colonelcandid.com. That's kind of where I post a lot of my writings, materials, whether I have a podcast, it's called Candid Leadership. The next episode actually drops tomorrow, and we'll talk about building and growing. What I'd like to leave each of you with is that, this skill, this attribute, this ability to transformationally lead others is something that you can grow, and you can build it, and you can learn it over a lifetime. Your experiences will shape you. But as you develop and as you lead through crisis, you'll have this kit bag of experience in your backpack. It's important. But don't just rely on your backpack. You have to think forward, and you have to constantly work to learn and grow these skills. So I challenge each of you. I mean, you took the first step today to attend this. Continue to grow, and please feel free to reach out to me on my website. You can reach out, and it'll link straight to my address. And thank you very much for attending. I appreciate it.
That URL might be short-sighted if you get promotion, right?
Yeah, well, we'll see. I think the URL is pretty solid. I'm headed in to take command at Cybercom, and then I'll have 2 fun years there, and we'll see afterwards.
Enjoy your assignment.
Just last comment before everyone parts. There was someone just pinged that there's a 6-year-old daughter who's watching right now, and she's admired by what you just have described. So that's a pretty.
Oh, thank you. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. All right, folks. Thank you all for joining on this Sunday. I'm sure you got other things to do for the rest of the weekend. Colonel Frost, thank you very much again for joining. The recording will be available sometime later this afternoon with some other assets from you, your website, and maybe your LinkedIn if someone from the US wants to take a look at it. Once again, let's stay in touch. Maybe we'll reconvene again, and everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and sane, right?
That's right. That's right, for sure. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
All the best. Thank you very much.
Take care. Thank you.
Good, guys.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gene, for putting this on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Great.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey,
Stay safe.
did you really stay safe?